And good morning, everyone. Welcome to Project 180. This is a virtual meeting and a podcast. It's all the things. Today, we're going to be speaking with a good friend of mine, Kevin Judge. You may remember him from a few episodes ago. We were talking about getting out of firefighting mode in your team. But today, we're going to be talking about something a little bit different. So Kevin, how about you please just introduce yourself, and then we'll get right into it.
Great. Thanks, Kevin. It's always weird to say thank you to Kevin when your name is Kevin. But anyway, thank you, Kevin. My name is Kevin Judge, and I'm the CEO of iNoble, a strategic business advisory firm in Ottawa, Canada. And our focus really is on helping organizations and leaders figure out how do we move from strategy to actually executing and getting business results. So happy to be here.
That's awesome, and thanks for the intro. And just again, a quick reminder for anybody who's on this call recording with us: if you have a question, please just type it in, or you can raise your hand, and we'll try and incorporate that as soon as we can too. Now, the topic we want to talk about today, I'm just referring to my notes to make sure I've got it exactly right. You sent me this great stat. Okay, so it's that 58% of workers spend less than 20 hours a week on valuable work. Which is, and I don't mean to be a jerk about it, but that's a great stat that a consultant would throw at you to say, hey, well, you really need my help. But I want to say, like, I've certainly experienced some of this myself in my years of working, but I'm curious of the source on that and what kind of work you would consider to be valuable. Let's just get a couple of definitions out of the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? You're 100% correct. It is definitely a stat that a consultant or a service provider would put out there to say, hey, come use my work. So it's from a company called QuickBase. Okay. I'm not 100% familiar with QuickBase, other than they tend to help organizations with managing their data. And so I have to interpret that statistic with a little bit of bias. But what I find really interesting is if you take that and then just apply it to, well, does that make sense in organizations? Does that stand up to most organizations? So when I look at, okay, well, what do we mean by valuable work? And I think actually, if I quote the stats very specifically, they say meaningful, but I changed the word meaningful to valuable because people get stuck on, well, who's it meaningful for? Is it meaningful for me as an employee, or is it meaningful for the organization? So the stat I have that supports this is that of those people that were surveyed, they spend less than 20 hours a week on work that moves key projects along, that delights customers and delivers value, right? So they're doing stuff for greater than 20 hours a week. And if we dig down into what is that stuff that they're doing, it's looking for information, talking to different people, compiling data from different data sets, et cetera, right? We all know all the things that can waste our day away.
Right. But to be clear, this, and sorry to cut you off.
Yeah.
But to be clear, this isn't like your Facebook time that we're talking about, right? This isn't break time. This is like you're searching for things. You're just ineffectively trying to connect with people to get that piece of data you need. That kind of work is what is kind of that extra 20 hours, right? In your 40-hour week, you've got 20. That's roughly, good to go, working towards a specific goal, and the other 20 is still supportive, but not necessarily efficient.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like yesterday, I was meeting with a bunch of executives, and one of them said, "Hey, sometimes we're the roadblock, right? So, in order to get things done, do you have to go through 3 different people to get approvals? Is there sign off? Are things manual versus automated, etc.? Right? Those are the things. Cat videos, sure, those get in the way." But I don't think that's what this survey was focusing on.
Well, that'd be a whole other survey, I guess. And
yeah,
different intent. But interesting. And I mean, I've certainly seen in my whole career, like there's always a block somewhere, and folks might start spinning their wheels, waiting for something to happen, whether it's an approval. In my history of developing documentation or curriculum, something that you're waiting for a review, somebody to give their input before you can move forward. how does an organization work to make this information flow better?
Well, I think the first thing that the organization needs to do is to realize that it's a problem, right? So and is it a problem that needs to be solved? And that really depends on where the organization is in terms of their maturity. They might parts of the work that they do might be relatively new, and therefore it's going to be a little bit chunky and slow and like no formal processes in place. Or are they an organization that's more mature and this is a repeated process maybe that is being done on a day-to-day basis that's really critical to driving the product forward or driving revenue, etc. Then in that case, they really want to consider, yes, we need to do it. You can also overlay on that what happens if we have all of these people, employees that are working to chase information, chase down decisions, etc. What is the cost to the organization? What's the cost to the customer? Are we ending up with people that, by no fault of their own, are incompetent? Are we ending up with customers that are getting really delayed on the ability to move forward? Right? So one CEO of a service provider organization, I was having a conversation with him at a different event yesterday, and he was mentioning the need to automate when a client signs off on a contract. So there's the administrative side of contracts and payments and all of that, but there's also another team that needs to know, hey, this client has signed off on the contract, so we now need to start working on the onboarding process or start working on fixing the bug that that are now paying us to fix, right? Whatever that is, right? So I'll think about how you can automate those.
Well,
I don't think I answered your question, but
it's okay. We'll go wherever we want to go. It's our thing. It's a Kevin show. We can do what we want. Interesting though, like in terms of like you're talking about onboarding a client, like we've signed a contract or we've got an agreement to whatever the situation is, and there's got to be some kind of checklist, right? Like, and it's great to automate, but even if it's not automated, you can have an Excel sheet, right? You can have a Word document template with all the things that need to happen, and you share that, and people check them off as you go. But it's not always easy to put that together. Because in my experience too, with one client, the contract will have a certain number of things that need to be checked off, but another client will be a slight variation of that. So it's kind of hard to always standardize it. So how would you approach that in an organization? Like, because you're not necessarily going for perfection. It's something that comes up with guests on this thing often. Like, you're not seeking perfection, you're seeking excellence.
Exactly, right?
You're not trying to make it the perfect system, but you're trying to make it better than it is. So how do you maybe approach that with your team and say, look, we really need to get this working better?
You've reminded me of my favorite quote, and that's sometimes good enough is. And that's something that I had to really share with my team when I was managing a team of quite intelligent individuals, but they often get stuck on trying to find, how do we perfect this process, or how do we capture rules that will cover every possibility that's out there. And the fact is, you can't. There's always exceptions to every rule, as much as we sometimes don't want it to happen. So I think what we need to do is really look at what is the process most of the time, and leave room for a human intelligence to be able to step in and say, okay, hold on, we've got an exception. We need to think about this and figure out, what do we do? Do we accept do we accept the exception, or do we reject it? And then what do we do? So right there is one of the challenges with AI, where AI is very good if everything is going to fit the model, but if something doesn't fit the model, you then have now what? and that's where you need that human intervention.
I think that's a really good point, and I'm glad you brought up AI, because it's, the thing right now that everyone's talking about. But the human element is like, I use ChatGPT myself, and create lists and checklists and things like that, or at least to inspire them, right? But yeah, it's not going to get every edge case. It's going to give you a nice little template that you can start with, but it's not going to cover everything.
Exactly, and sometimes ChatGPT is wrong. Right.
There's that too. Yeah.
Right. I haven't tested this theory, but somebody told me to type in a mathematical question, a complex mathematical question, 3 or 4 different times into ChatGPT, and you'll find that you don't always get the same answer. So I don't know if that's true or not, but we have to watch out for what AI gives us. But if we think outside the scope of just ChatGPT, a lovely tool, I've asked my ChatGPT to name itself. And I forget what her name is, but anyways,
I was going to say it has to be Kevin. It has to be.
No, it's not Kevin.
No,
right? But so now ChatGPT is a part-time employee on my organization, right? But there are other systems or AI interfaces that can help organizations. One of the ones that came up yesterday was if we think about the supply chain, right? So there's lots of issues with supply chain right now, with the Panama Canal, Suez Canal, and pirates and drought and reduced shipping, transfers, etc. So there's a huge problem with supply chain that impacts organizations. Well, AI can help to really look at and predict where might there be problems in your supply chain, and offer suggestions on how you can mitigate those risks, right? So lots of different opportunities there. Now, you did ask, Kevin, about how do you actually come up with this checklist. That
how do you kind of, because one of the things you said at the beginning is you have to recognize that there's a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
So then it's about working with the team to come up with that list of things. So how do you maybe have that conversation, initiate that if you're recognizing there's an issue?
Yeah, so there's a bunch of different ways that you can do it. One of my favorite old-fashioned ways is just to get all of the interested parties in a room with a massive whiteboard, sticky notes, etc., and say, okay, let's lay out the process, and just start mapping out, hey, here, step 1, this is what happens, and how do we get to the end of that process, and then capturing that. But there's also technology that you can use to do the same thing, where you can actually record somebody going through a process and look at what are all the steps that are involved. So I'll say that another option is, instead of having a tool do that, you can actually have a person do that. So I'll give you an example here. I'm pretty good at managing other people's finances, but I'm terrible at managing my own. And I hate doing bookkeeping. I hate doing month-end reporting, etc. So that's why I have other people help me to do that. Otherwise, it doesn't get done. But at one point, I have to do it. So instead of reinventing the wheel every month as to how do I create these month-end reports that I give to my accountant, etc., I had somebody actually sit beside me as I was painfully going through the process, and we mapped out, okay, here's what you're doing, here's what makes sense, and here's the steps. So now every quarter when I need to put these together, I pull out my checklist. Here's the reports I need to run, here's the configuration of the report, here's what I need to send the accountant, here's the backup information I need to have. Right, so it really is about just sitting down, going through the process, and documenting it. Something that we often don't like to do because we're too busy firefighting, doing other things. But save a lot of time and a lot of energy and a lot of errors if we actually were to sit down, take the time to document.
Well, there's an irony there, I guess, right? Because you it'll help. You have to know that documenting and building your process is going to help you in the long run, but still it's hard to take that time to go and do that, regardless of what your company is, the project is you're working on. But ultimately, it's going to help. Like I always project management sphere, I always kind of go back to that agile approach where, the doctrine is, you split things up into small chunks and you move things forward that way based on whatever it is you're working on. But it seems like that's the same thing we're talking about here, really, is like you take that time and little iterative steps are going to make your whole life a lot easier.
Yeah, definitely is going to make it easier. A lot less aggravating if it's something that you don't like doing, or if it's a mundane task, but you need to have some accuracy in it, right? And so we're talking here, in the example I gave you is my month-end financials. That may seem massive to some people. It may not to other people. If we're talking business processes in larger corporations, then it's a hell of a lot more involved. But you can scale the documentation to the level of what it is that you're working on. But as an organization, or even as a leader, you need to decide, is this a problem that we need to solve now? Or is it okay to have Kevin sitting for 4 hours doing something that probably could take him only an hour to do?
Yeah, it's true. Like, you have to make that decision point. When is this? Because things are working. Regardless of how efficient it is, you're still delivering, the thing that you're trying to deliver, right? So sometimes it's hard to argue, well, we're successful, like we're delivering the thing. But if there's other metrics involved, maybe that's how you're trying to, in terms of qualitative analysis rather than it's specifically one metric of delivering on the project. There's got to be other metrics you can involve. What are the kind of measurements do you think would fit into that conversation to help the organization see it?
Well, I look at it this, and I'll just continue playing with the Kevin doing financials for 4 hours, right? So it could take me 1 hour to do, or it could take me 4 hours to do. If I'm spending 4 hours on it, the delta there is 3 hours. What else could I be doing for those 3 hours that might provide more strategic value for the organization, more value for a customer, more value for a product development team, etc. Right? So we have to think about not only what is the direct cost of it, but what is the opportunity cost of choosing to do an action or choosing not to do an action. And that opportunity cost is where we really need to put our thinking caps on and think a little bit more strategically for the organization. What value are we missing out on by spending that time, that resource on that? And we're using me as an example with a delta of 3 hours, but realistically in an organization, as that statistic said at the beginning of our conversation, it's 58% of employees that are spending less than 20 hours a week on work that's important to the organization. So just use that stat. And if you don't like it, use a lower number. Let's say it's 30%, and do the math. Like, how much time is that? What could you do with that time? How much is that costing you?
Yeah. No, you're actually reminding me, project, this is several jobs ago and several years ago, but we had just that. We had all these shared drives where people had to go find things. We'd put on, hosting different kinds of events. So it was a very standard process for each one, but each one was very unique, right? So it was always, pros and cons and changes and little additions to each one. But we had to go find things in these shared drives. And there was no really good standardized way of doing it. Stuff was still getting delivered, but the stress level was up here. So there's a metric, right? Like, as you've got to have, this thing delivered by Tuesday, and if it's Monday night and you're still scrambling because you can't find stuff that you need, boom, your stress level's not off the roof. So we actually did a quick survey with the team, like, how much time do you spend just looking for stuff in these drives? Because we wanted to clean them up and create like a SharePoint site or something like that.
Right.
And everyone was saying, like, it turned out it was like 60% of their week was looking for stuff. Right. And you show that to the boss and like, oh my God, we had SharePoint a week later, right? We had the license. So when we started building this whole information management strategy and blah, blah, blah. So you can certainly see impact on day-to-day work, but from a project level, so from a team level, it seems pretty obvious. This is a great way to make things more efficient, make people happier. But on a project level, an individual project level, and also just make things go a lot smoother generally if you can document these kind of processes.
Oh, definitely. And that documentation is really, really important. especially if you're trying to get resources that you don't already have. So you've reminded me of an example. This goes way back, but when I first started my career, jokingly 5,000 years ago, I had a really slow computer, and the work that I needed to do, I would do a bunch of work, and then I'd have to wait for the computer to think about what I was doing and generate an answer. And it was frustrating for me. So that led to a reduced morale, reduced engagement, boredom, etc. You don't want your employees having that. But so I was sitting there waiting, and I asked my boss for a computer, and he said, "Hey, we can't afford a computer for you." So I went back and put my thinking cap on, and I started recording over a week how much time I actually sat at my computer, twiddling my thumbs, waiting for it, and applied that time to how much I was making. And I went back to my boss and said, "Hey, by the way, I forget what the number was, but by the way, it's costing you X for me to have this slow computer, or you could spend $1,000 and get me a faster one, and you could save some money. It's up to you." I got a computer really fast.
Well, and maybe that's a great way to kind of wrap this part of the conversation, because I think it really comes down to showing the value, right? Like you're demonstrating, in that case, it's perfect because you're demonstrating your value as an employee compared to what value you could be providing. You're showing a couple different scenarios and giving them the option to pick.
That's right.
Which is like it's like what you do with your kids, right? It's like, well, we can go to Disney, or you can buy 10,000 Pokemon cards. Like, which would you rather do? And they'll tend to make the right choice or whatever if given the options.
Yeah,
Not that all management are children. I don't mean to say that.
They chose Pokemon cards, didn't they?
Probably, yeah. In terms of like your own experience, like we talked about learning quite a bit. So the whole idea of trying to convince maybe an organization of your value. And so I think you alluded to that in terms of, we're not just training in the training department. We're like, we're corporate knowledge. We're actually helping the bottom line of the organization. We're doing all these kinds of things. In terms of project management, I find the same response sometimes. I mean, not can't brush everybody or color everybody with the same brush, but certainly, you're just the admin kind of tracking tasks and stuff, when there's so much more to it than that. What would you propose as maybe a way to kind of help advocate, not just for yourself as a person, but for the role in general when you work in this kind of space?
It's interesting. I've got two answers for that. One, I'm gonna apply the learning and development perspective to it, but then two, just from the project management perspective. Sometimes you need to make bold statements and really catch people off guard. The example I have for that is I was just hired in an organization to lead up their learning and development function. And I was at a one-day workshop. I wasn't running it. I was an attendee, and they had their executive team there. And there's this discussion in the room about a problem that the organization was having. And somebody said, "Well, all we need to do is have some training and that'll fix it. And aren't we lucky we've got Kevin Judge here? Kevin Judge, what do you think?" Well, this is where I knocked them off their socks, because I stood up and I said, "You know what? This is a really great problem that you have, but training is not the solution." And they're like, "What? You're the training guy. How can you say it's not the solution?" The reason why it wasn't a solution is because I was looking at it with a broader perspective. People were not being effective in what was needed to be done because they didn't have the tools to do it. They didn't have a process in place to do it. They didn't have measurements. They didn't have expectations, etc. All of those things couldn't be fixed by what I'm doing, right? So sometimes you need to make bold statements. Now, when it comes to project management and the work that you do, I have to tell you right now, there's a lot of people that have no clue what you do. They think they know what you do, but they don't really know what you do. They don't know the value that you provide to the organization. They don't know what they don't know. And this is where you, as project managers, project coordinators, project leaders, program managers, whatever your title is, need to really show them and help them understand what it is you do. Now, I'm not talking about you doing a lunch and learn and saying, hey, here's what the role of a project manager is, because nobody wants to sit and listen to that. What you need to do is to demonstrate it. You need to be speaking up in meetings, finding the appropriate channels to share your insights as to, hey, here's how we could add value to this. Here's how we could reduce time to market. Here's how we could help make sure that there are fewer errors that are going out with our products, etc. So think about what are some of the things that you can help the organization achieve by what you're doing. I don't know, Kevin, what do you think? Does that make sense?
I chuckled a little bit only because I have done the lunch and learns.
Sorry.
Describing what the project manager, but to your point, like that's not enough, right? Like it's nice to share that, and hey, I'm here to do this kind of job, and that's fine. But you're right. It's about. I find that being a project manager in general, okay, there's lots of skills, but again, really, really broad strokes is about communication and about making sure communication's happening. And like, we talked about in terms of, people doing 20 hours a week of ineffective work. Like, how is that being communicated? How is that being improved? Well, somebody with the project manager skill set comes in, they start talking to people, seeing the trends, collecting the data, and then presenting solutions. And again, like we were talking before, it's more about giving them the option, because obviously what you're doing is working, right? And now I've got a dog screaming next to me. This is the part I'm gonna have to cut out later. So anyway, we'll pause for just a second because I can't hear myself think.
Well, why don't I say something, Kevin, while you're dealing with that? So, I remember speaking to an executive one day, and I had done a whole bunch of work for them over the last 6 months, year, 2 years, etc. And his question to me was, "What have you done for me lately?" Right now, while that's a harsh question, we have to remember that it is pretty harsh. We can't just be doing our jobs. Like you could just do your job and just be happy and do that for the next 30 years. That's fine. Or if you want to grow and excel and get more involved in the organization and provide more value, etc., find out what is it that you're doing to solve the problems that people have. Right? As a leader myself, I've got tons of challenges. And you'll see this with the leaders that are in your organization, is they're in back-to-back meetings all day, every day. And by 5 o'clock in the evening, that's the only time that they actually get to start working on the work that they want to do and need to do to move projects along. So what can you do to help them to solve the problems that they have? So that comes with having conversations with them to understand, hey, what's on your plate? What's going on? What's the biggest pain point that you have? And thinking to yourself, how can I help? Maybe you can't solve it. Maybe you can't help them. But even just building those relationships is really, really important. You have to think of yourself as a marketer, but you're marketing your services internally within your organization. So apply that filter on as well. Kevin, do you want to start on that?
Yeah, thanks. I will. I think, Don, I think any progress is good progress. And I think if you really think of yourself, like we kind of mentioned before, that iterative kind of quality in terms of making little changes here and there, sometimes that's the absolute best you can do, and you're probably doing just that. I think maybe, we can all feel like frustrated, like this should be going faster. This should be the adoption should be wider. We should be really doing a lot more. But you're really talking about not just a project management solution. You're talking about change management with the organization, and change of just how an organization works takes a long time. So the fact that you're there and you are showing value and you're part of that team and they're appreciating it is huge. So you've got that first hurdle covered. Now it's just a matter of being patient as I think it keeps going. I don't know what Kevin, what do you think?
Yeah, I put into the chat 3 words so I wouldn't forget. So horse baby patience. So you can what's that phrase? You can take a horse to water, but doesn't mean they're necessarily going to drink. I don't know exactly what it is, but it's like that, right? So you can guide them to the solution, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to adopt it. Or even if they do start to adopt it, it doesn't mean that they're going to get the benefits out of it right away. And they may revert back to the old way of doing things if they're not finding success in some of the things that they're doing. The baby piece was baby steps, especially with organizations. You're introducing something. If they were baby light, which maybe once you got in there was really not baby light. They said project management light. And maybe once you got in there, you said, it's actually project management scarce or project management nada. But,
Exactly.
it's baby steps.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right. So it's baby steps. Help them with something small that they're going to see the benefit from and go, oh my gosh, I can't believe we never did this before. I love it. Give us more. Right. And get them wanting more and more and more. And then the last piece Kevin mentioned is patience. Right. For us as experts, we know it's plain and simple. This is the solution. This is going to solve all your problems, etc. They just aren't going to move as fast as you would like. So be really patient with them and just continue the momentum forward. As long as you're moving forward, then things are good.
It's a good question. Do you want to try this one first, Kevin? Or anybody else has thoughts, by all means. It's not just the Kevin show, but still a good question. Kev, you want to go for it?
Actually, Ola put up their hand.
Oh, yes, you're right. Ola, did you have an answer or did you have another question?
Yes, I believe when you get into a project, especially as a project manager, as a newbie, I will use my example years ago when I started. Being bold means you must be creative. Now, you don't need to be creative and trying to think something new. Look at the existing plan or structure you already have on ground. Looking, how can you do it better? That's one. Two, in doing it better, what are the little things we can, I can bring on board, and how will I communicate this idea to the team, which is very, very key. I usually say this as a project manager, 90% of your work is communication. You must be able to communicate effectively to your team. This is what I want. And I have some kind of tricks I use around that. If you are meeting a new project team for the first time, instead of you discussing the project for the first 15 minutes, learn about the team, what have they been doing individually, try to use some techniques and ask them some questions. So once this is key, you are able to assign roles to them based on their strength. So I think these are things you need to understand. Then leadership is key. I would encourage you to just develop your leadership skill set as a project manager. You must, at times you don't have answers to all, but always learn to be emotionally available. You may not have answers to things, but emotionally you must be available. So I think those are just my own viewpoints about that.
Points.
Wow.
In terms of being just available as on the human level, I think is huge. I think you're absolutely right. You have to make human connections with people on a team, and you make friends that way, but you can make great colleagues that way and great partners that way. In terms of being bold,
and advocates too, Kevin.
Yeah. Your question, Sheng, about how to be bold day to day. I just want to make sure that you're not going into meetings like, this is what we're going to do. Like that's the worst thing that you could do, right? Is to go into meetings like that. But I think we all understand that. But being bold is being able to just advocate for yourself and stand up for your ideas and to accept when you're either voted down, which is okay, or if you just turns out that you're wrong. I mean, that's okay too. Part of it is failing, right? Having a team try something, it doesn't work. Okay, we'll try something else. And that's all part of the communication and having good rapport with that team as well. Is that you have the freedom and the space. Okay, let's try this new project management tool. Let's give it a shot for a month. it stunk. Fine to throw it in the trash and try something else.
Yeah.
But being bold in with your ideas and being bold with your personality, I think is important.
Yeah, I'm reminded, Project Management Symposium in Ottawa, Canada. There was a breakout session where there was this amazing speaker talking. He happens to be hosting this meeting today, so Kevin McGowan was talking.
Oh,
and
stop it! Oh.
And he shared an example of something that we've both done, which is reaching out to people in your organization that are perhaps your clients. When I did it, it was every manager in the organization. Kevin McGowan, I don't remember who it was that you did that with, but it was reaching out to them just to have a conversation about, hey, what's going on? What's working for you? What's not working for you? And listening to what they say. You don't have to be able to solve their problems, but just listening. It's amazing what people will share with you. But also you develop a relationship just because you cared to ask them about them and what they're doing and what their pain points are. So that's something that can really, really help you as you're growing in your roles to get increased credibility across the organization.
100%, and I agree with myself, I guess. But thanks for that, Kevin. It's good points too. Now look, we're about 8:51 local time, which means we need to wrap this up in a few minutes, but I wanted to make sure if anybody else has any other questions, that they were able to do so now. So if you've got a question or a comment, please just go off mute or click the raise hand button at this point. This is our last call for questions and thoughts. No? Okay, well, with that, we will wrap it for today. And I want to say thank you to Kevin Judge for being here today. I know it's an early call in the Ottawa time zone, Eastern time zone, but thanks so much for coming along and doing this with us. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me. And I wish everybody here all success in your careers in the project management world.